If you are planning to study in Australia, we are going to debunk some of the common myths that international students have about university intakes in Australia. These are some of the common myths that I had when I was a student, and I'm sure many other students have it in their mind when they are planning to study here. So without wasting much time, let's get into them. Now, the first myth we have on our hands is you can only apply to Australian universities once a year. And many international students who are planning to study here might not know, but we have two major intakes in Australia. First one is February-March, which is the largest intake of international and domestic students. It's basically a start of a new academic year in Australia around February-March, and most of the international students start during this time. So most of the students think that it is the only intake we have here in Australia. But the reality is that we have another major intake in July, which is also known as winter intake. Many international and domestic students also tend to start in July intake as well. Now, some of you may already know about it, but there are other alternative intakes available during the year also. So apart from these two major intakes, the other intake we have is spring intake, which usually happens around September, and November intake, which is also known as summer intake. Now, not every university offers these two alternate intakes, but the chances is that most of the universities have either one of these intakes available. So the good news is, if you are planning to study in Australia, you can choose to apply for different intake. For some reason, if you can't apply for February-March, you can look at July intake. If not, then you can even look at spring or even November intake. So yes, there are plenty of intakes to choose from. But as I said, majority of the students start in February-March, so that's why there's a bit of misconception regarding that Australian universities only accept applications for one intake. So hopefully that cleared it up. Moving on to our myth number 2, which is all courses are offered during each and every intake. So as I mentioned, there are two major intakes and two alternate intakes, but the reality is that not every single course that you are planning to study in Australia will be available in each term or each intake. Just know that some courses might be offered during alternate term, which means they may not be offering the course in one of the terms or even alternate years. So it's basically demand and supply thing. Some courses being more popular, they're obviously offered throughout the year, but there are some courses that may not be as popular. They are offered every alternate term or sometimes even alternate years. So if you're planning to study in Australia, it's important for you to find out which university is offering which type of course and in which intake as well. As I mentioned earlier, that every course may not be offered in every single intake. Even when I was studying in my university, there were some units that were only offered during a specific time of the year. If you ask me which intake has the highest number of courses available, well, that will be February-March, because it's the largest intake here. Comparatively, there will be less number of courses offered in July intake. Still plenty of them, but comparatively less. And in September or November intake, you will see even less courses offered. That's again because of less students studying during those semesters. So yeah, just to be clear, not all courses are offered in every single intake. The myth number 3, which is quality of education varies by the intake. Not true again. Regardless of which intake you're planning to study, the quality of education remains same in Australian universities. However, some students may feel a bit of difference, especially those starting in a spring or summer semester, that there are less number of people or staff members available on campus, or there are less on-campus activities happening during those semesters. And that's simply because less number of students are taking courses during those semesters. And when I started my university in November intake as well, I felt pretty much the same, that there are less number of activities happening, there are fewer number of staff members on campus, and it just felt a little bit empty. But when the February-March intake started, a lot of students returned back to campus, and it felt very different then. So the quality of education remains same regardless of any intake. And if you ever feel like there is a difference between the quality of education, you can always report or give feedback to your university about it. Myth number 4, it is easier to get accepted into the July intake. Again, not really. Now I understand why this myth could be there. As I mentioned earlier, February-March is the largest intake of international students and domestic students in Australia. So there is very stiff competition among all the applicants. However, in comparison, there are less number of students usually apply for July intake. As I said, it's the second most popular semester, but it's not as popular as February or March. So there are chances that there are less number of students applying for it, and that's why some students might feel that it's easier to get accepted in the July intake. rather than the February intake. But the reality is, regardless of whichever intake you apply for, you will still need to meet all the requirements. Whether it is about writing your SOPs, meeting the genuine student requirement, providing the financial support evidence, or applying for a student visa, you still need to do all these processes and need to meet all the requirements. So it is one of those myths again, which is certainly not true. That is easier to get accepted for July intake rather than February or March. The myth number 5, it's too late to apply for an intake if you miss the deadline. Now, most of the Australian universities do have deadlines for their applications, as they need to make sure that the students have enough time to apply for their visas and meet the other requirements so they can easily come to Australia within the time frame for the start of intake. But that doesn't mean that there may not be concessions available for some students. Some universities might be able to provide some concessions on their application deadlines depending upon the situation. And some universities even have rolling intakes, which means they may be able to offer alternate terms for international students. And hey, if you missed out one intake, what's a big deal? There's always a next intake to apply for. It's only few months away. I actually applied myself for a July intake, but I couldn't get the thing sorted in time, so I ended up coming in November intake. Last but not the least myth about scholarships, that scholarships are only offered during the major intakes. This is kind of a bit tricky one. Now, I agree that majority of the scholarships are offered during February-March intakes. It makes sense because it's the largest intake. But that does not mean that you can't get scholarship during the other intakes. In fact, some universities offer special scholarships during the low season, like for spring or summer semester. As less number of students are usually interested to study in these intakes, so the chances are that you might be able to score scholarship even during those terms. So just keep in mind that scholarships are available throughout the year, not just for specific one intake or so. Again, I have to mention this, the majority of the scholarships will be offered through February-March, but that does not mean the other intakes don't have scholarships available. If you are interested to know more about scholarships, we have a page regarding 100% fully funded scholarships that you can apply as an international student. We'll leave a link of that in the description box below, so make sure to check it out. If you are planning to study in Australia, I suggest you to download our free 2025 Overseas Student Guide. Again, it covers heaps of information that will help you to plan your study, life and work in Australia. The link will be available in the description box below. Now, if you are planning to come to Australia for your studies, I suggest you check this video here, which provides a free orientation session for international students. It's not a very long video, but it covers all the basics you need to know as an international student. So if you are planning to study here, I highly recommend you to check this video out. So click the video over there and I'll see you there.